Good morning, everyone. I am Miss Long, and I'm here with you with ninth grade English Language Arts. I hope everyone's doing well this week and getting through the quarantine with no problems. So we're going to kind of keep moving on with the TV lessons, and I'm going to show you some new stuff this week, and we're going to look at basically what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this school quarter. We'll be dealing with argumentative writing. So what we're going to be looking at today is a new objective. Basically, it's delineate and evaluate the argument and specific claims in a text, assessing whether the reasoning is valid and the evidence is relevant and sufficient, and identify false statements and fallacious reasoning. Now, that's a mouthful. So we're going to break it down and talk about what are we really looking at when we're looking at an argumentative text. And eventually, we will lead to how do we write an argumentative text, okay? So if you are going to be taking any notes, you might want to get some of these terms down because these are terms that we need to know as we are going through the argumentative text. First of all, an argument is a logical way of presenting a belief, a conclusion, or a stance on a topic, okay? Arguments are supported with, note, logical reasoning and relevant evidence. Now, basically what that means is logical means it makes sense. It's what makes sense to the reader, okay? And reasoning is that factual explanation based on what makes sense, okay? So don't get bogged down in the terminology associated with argument. It's actually pretty easy because you've been doing it your entire life and you may not know that. And in fact, I'm sure you've heard your parents say before, stop arguing with me. Or even they'll tell you and your siblings, stop arguing. Okay, and usually that's fussing, right? Usually if they tell you to stop arguing, they mean stop fussing. You're complaining. You're fighting with each other. And to a degree, that is what academic argument is, but it's in a much more professional way. And we're going to look at how we do that and how we show disagreement or agreement with a certain idea, and how we deal with people who disagree with us, and how do we present our ideas in an academic and professional way, okay? There are basically three purposes of an argument. And please note that it's not always to change a reader's mind, but that is a major reason why we argue, is to change the reader's mind. You know, if you disagree with something, then that's the writer's way of trying to make you see, well, this is another way of looking at this topic, and I want you to agree with me. But we also know that there are some topics that we will never agree with, right? And in fact, those are our controversial topics. You know, things that we see politicians, talking about in the news. You know, those really hard to deal with topics. And sometimes we're never going to compromise on our values or on our beliefs on that specific topic. So one of the reasons that we argue is to convince the reader to accept what is written. Okay, to try to get them to say, look, I know you don't agree with me, but listen to what I have to say. And, you know, that's the major reason that we sometimes have to write an argument. It's just to get our ideas out there and say, please, listen to what I have to say. You don't have to agree with me, but I need you to hear what I have to say. And the last reason for an argument is to motivate the reader to take action based on what is written. For example, we have topics like bullying, right? Now, how many people are going to go out there and say, oh yeah, I'm all for bullying? Nobody's going to outright say that, but we know it still happens, right? And, you know, human trafficking, for example. No one's going to say, oh yeah, that's great, I love human trafficking. No one is going to outright say that, but we know it still happens. So sometimes we have to, a writer is writing a text to motivate that reader to take action based on what they're saying. Saying, hey, yeah, bullying is a problem and we need to make it stop. And here's how we do that. Okay, so that's an example of a purpose of argumentative writing. And in fact, the text that we're going to look at today deals primarily with this third purpose. Okay. I want you to think about when is a time that you have argued with someone. Maybe, say for example, you're telling your mom, Mom, I really just feel like I need a longer curfew, a later curfew. Although right now, all of us must abide by the 10 p.m. curfew, even your parents. So you may be convincing them, my curfew is 9 o'clock, can we make it 10? Okay, as long as I'm in before the police come and get me. But imagine that you are trying to convince your mom that you want a later curfew. What do? How do you approach that? Right? And we do this, we all do this. And you go up to your mom and you say, Mom, I want a later curfew. And she's like, nope, absolutely not. And that's that's someone coming against what you're trying to get to. And so what I'm going to do is show you how that works in the process of argument. So these are the parts of an argument. So I need you to take a minute, and if you're taking notes, jot these down. I'm going to give you just a second, and then we'll go over them together. Now, an argument is complicated in some ways. There's never going to be a text that doesn't have some level of complication to it. But if we break it down a little bit into these manageable parts, this is primarily what you're going to see in an argument. First of all, you have your claim. And the claim is how you or the writer feels about a topic. So if you're reading a text, it's going to be what that writer is trying to get you to think or believe or feel, okay? So that's the claim. Grounds is basically the reasons why. Why it's why you feel that certain way or why that writer feels the way that he or she does. But then we have to justify it, okay? You have to back it up with evidence. If you don't back it up with evidence, no one's going to listen to what you have to say because then you're just stating your opinion and, a lot of times, just spitting out how we feel to people, maybe we're venting, right? We may be venting, but are we actually changing people's minds? No. What is it that changes people's minds? Backing it up with evidence, okay? Now, counterclaim is what the opposition says. That's the other side, the opposite opinion, okay? So when you are trying to convince your mom that you need a later curfew, your claim is that you need a later curfew, okay? Well, why? Because you're growing up and you're needing more responsibility, right? Yeah. Really, we want to have a little bit more fun with our friends, right? Counterclaim is what your mom says, no, absolutely not, right? And then rebuttal is really what makes an argument, okay? When we're in middle school, we do a lot of persuasion pieces, or maybe even in 5th grade, you had your writing assessment and you had that persuasion piece, and that's where you present your opinion and why you feel that way. Argument takes it up a notch, okay? Argument has this word down here, rebuttal. Rebuttal is showing how the opposition is wrong or flawed or weak. Okay, and remember that I said there are some topics that never, ever, ever is that other side going to agree with you. It's just impossible sometimes. But what do you need to do when you're showing them why you feel the way that you do? You got to show how there's at least, okay, I understand your side, but let me show you the weakness in the way you're thinking. Okay, and that's what rebuttal does. Okay, so when you're arguing with your mother and saying, yes, I need a later curfew, and she says no, and you say, that's your counterclaim, but then you're going to come back with some rebuttal. And you're going to say, yes, Mom, but I'm a responsible kid, right? And then you start backing it up with justification. You start saying, remember how I brought all A's on my report card? Remember how when such and such was out too late, I said, we need to get back home. So you start bringing up all this evidence. You say, you remember how I'm more responsible than my sibling? Whatever it is, you justify yourself, right? And mom says, okay, I'm listening. I hear what you have to say, but it's just too dangerous and you're just too young, right? So she brings back her side of it. And of course, then you really need to step it up and you need to say, okay, yes, mom, I am younger than you would like, but I still am a responsible kid. And if I don't push those boundaries, if I don't have something that tests me, then how am I ever going to grow up and be an independent individual, right? So you bring your argument to your mom. Now, she may or may not ever agree with you and give you that extra curfew, but at least you're going through the process of argument and you have done this. So it's not that hard to do in real life. What's difficult is applying it to a text or applying it in our own writing. So what we're going to do today is look at a specific text, and we're going to see how does this writer build these ideas into his text, okay? And as we're going, what I would like for you to do is to look for these. And if you want to jot this down, you may. But look at what is the author's claim, okay? What is it that, think about those three purposes of the argument, that it's either to change the reader's mind, to make them feel the way that he does, or it's to just bring attention to a topic so that somebody will take action. So think about his purpose for writing and what is it that he is claiming in this text. What evidence does he use to back himself up? Okay? What is he saying? What are those specific facts? What are those specific details that show, oh yeah, this is a problem. Maybe we should do something about it, right? What we need to consider is, are there any barriers to what he's saying? And I like to use that term barrier. Barrier is like a wall, if you will. And when we're arguing and when we're reading argument, immediately our mind starts saying, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem with that, right? And we all do this. And in fact, if you look at the news every single day, the news is going to be giving you this question: should we reopen the state? Should we not? Okay? And even as we speak, Governor Ivey is talking to the rest of the state of Alabama and making that decision, either to reopen the state and at least how that process will go, right? And, argument is a very complicated process in that no matter what we say, there's always going to be a barrier, okay? There's never, ever a perfect solution. I hate to break it to you. And that's why so many topics nowadays are so controversial. If there were a good answer, we'd have a good answer. But so many topics are I see all these problems with if we open the state back up too soon, then too many people, it's going to just start this process going all over again, and we're going to have more sickness and more death. And so we have all these ideas. But on the other hand, if we don't reopen the state, how many more people are going to lose their jobs? How many more people are going to experience domestic violence and child abuse? And it's just all these ideas that are out there. There is no good solution. So we have to take both sides and we have to look at that, and we have to look at the barriers to our claim, or to the claim that the author is presenting, and look at how does the author address those barriers, okay? And as we get ready to write, we need to see what are barriers to what we're saying, right? I also want us to look at how does he conclude his argument and how effective was that argument, okay? And it's a very short text, and that argument is there. And there is some strong writing here, and we're going to look at that text. And I want us to look at, does he accomplish his purpose? And does he accomplish it well? Okay, and a lot of times that's opinionated, but you can come up with a good answer, okay? Okay, I've done as well as I can getting this text on here. I'm going to read it, but I'm also going to leave this up here so that you can see it. And as we go through, I'm going to look at these questions. What is the claim? What's the evidence that he uses? Are there any barriers? And then how does he conclude? And is it done well. Okay, it's called The Forever War of the Mind. It's by Max Cleland from the New York Times, and it was written in 2009. And he's writing about PTSD. Okay, all right. So as I'm reading, you can read along here on the screen. War is haunting. Death, pain, blood, dismemberment. A buddy dying in your arms. Imagine trying to get over the memory of a bomb splitting a Humvee apart beneath your feet and taking your leg with it. The first time I saw the stilled bodies of American soldiers dead on the battlefield is as stark and brutal a memory as the one of the grenade that ripped off my right arm and both legs. No, the soldier never forgets, but neither should the rest of us. That's his claim right there. He comes right out and says, PTSD is a real thing for people who have experienced it, especially the American soldier here. He's focusing on American soldiers, but he also gives us a call to action here. But neither should the rest of us, right? When I was wounded, post-traumatic stress disorder did not officially exist. It was recognized as a legitimate illness only in 1978 during my tenure as head of the Veterans Administration under President Jimmy Carter. Today, it is not only recognized, but the Army and the VA know how to treat it. I can offer no better testament than my own recovery. There are estimates that 35% of the soldiers who fought in Iraq will suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm sure the numbers for Afghanistan are similar. Researchers have found that nearly half of those returning with the disorder have suicidal thoughts. Suicide among active duty soldiers is on pace to hit a record total this year. More than 1.7 million soldiers have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Imagine that some 600,000 of them will have crippling memories trapped in a vivid and horrible past from which they can't seem to escape. We have a family army today, unlike the army seen in any generation before. We have fought these wars with the reserves and the National Guard. Fathers, mothers, soccer coaches, and teachers are the soldiers coming home. Whether they like it or not, they will bring their war experiences home to their families and communities. Okay? Now, what points does he use to justify his claim? Look at the evidence that he's giving us. Guys, I told you last week, go to those numbers. 35% of soldiers who fought in Iraq will suffer PTSD. Right? He also talks about the 1.7 million soldiers who have served in Iraq, and that 600,000 of them, suffer from those crippling memories. Look at his crippling memories. Mentioned in that first introduction paragraph. And he does that for a reason. Look at all those startling images. The war is haunting. That itself, like this image of that, almost like a ghost following him everywhere he goes. Right? Death, pain, blood, dismemberment. A buddy dying in your arms, all of that's very brutal. Those brutal images are there. Why? To show us what's going on in his head and to make that war, that PTSD, come to life for us, right? Okay, so he even mentions suicide and how it affects, how suicide is high for those who suffer from PTSD. And then look at how he concludes, okay? What does he do? And think here, like if we were reading this and we know that here his purpose, he's saying here that PTSD is a legitimate problem and that we, the audience, should not forget it. Those of us who don't have PTSD should not forget that these soldiers do. That's his claim. Okay, and he justifies it with some evidence, right? He gives us these images. He gives us this very brutal image. He gives us some statistics that back up his point. What is maybe a barrier to what he is saying? Is this a real problem for those of us who do not suffer from it? And he addresses that, right? Look at how he addresses that in that last paragraph. He says, we have a family army today. He appeals to those of us who have families. He's saying, the soldier is just like you and I. He is trying to make that connection with us, and that it's not just military personnel who are suffering, but it is, he mentions fathers, mothers, soccer coaches, teachers. That's everyone, right? He's lumping everyone in there, and he's like, this is a real problem for everyone today, not just those who are who are immediately suffering from PTSD. So he makes that call to action there. Now, whether or not you feel like this is an effective piece is your opinion, but does he do his job? Yes. He states that claim. He gives us some very vivid images and some good evidence that he backs up pretty well, and he gives us that justification, and then he concludes with that call to action. Let's do something about it. Be aware. Know that it's in your community, and know that it's not just the soldier who suffers, right? Okay, so that's what we do when we are looking at argument. Okay, so as you're looking at a text that is argumentative, you need to look at what is it that this author is getting across? What is it that he wants us to either think or feel, or at least, hey, just go with me for a minute, right? And that's what you need to do. And then look at, does this author use specific evidence to back it up? Okay, again, opinions are fine, but how many of us are going to agree with someone who does not give us specific reasons why? Okay, think of any barriers to that action, to that claim. Is there anything that says, oh, well, but here's a problem I see with what you're saying? Okay, so think about that. Is there that counterclaim that, no, I don't really agree with what you're saying? And does that author address it? Okay, so that's what we do when we evaluate an argument, and we look at how well that author is doing that. Okay, all right. So next week we'll look at some more text, and we'll look at how authors literally manipulate language to really make us feel a certain way. And that's when it gets really fun, okay? And then, of course, we will get into a little bit of the writing process later this quarter, okay? All right, guys, that is all we have time for today. And I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you guys again next week. All right, bye.